Thank you all for coming back just 3 minutes after the last session with the excellent Tony Abbott, former Prime Minister of Australia.
Thank you, Sasha. Lovely to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
You've had people coming up and taking selfies with you already. Celebrity of sorts in the pub?
Of sorts. But look, Australians gravitate to pubs. So I'm amongst fellow Australians.
And Tony, you were born in London. You refer to this excellent country as Mother England. Would you run to be the next leader of the Conservative Party?
No, look, I was lucky enough to have 2 years as a student at Oxford, and they offered me a third year. And I deliberately said no, because I knew if I stayed another year, I probably would never go back. And much as I admire Britain, much as I regard myself as an incorrigible Anglophile, I never wanted to stop being an Australian. And what I thought then, I think even more so now.
And then what's your sense of how the Conservative Party is doing walking around the conference?
Yeah, well, obviously it was a catastrophic defeat, and plainly the party faces some serious challenges. I've got to say, I've been quite encouraged by the mood of this conference. I didn't get here in time to hear Kemi's speech yesterday, but I have read parts of the script. She's absolutely spot on when it comes to a strong civic patriotism instead of this wishy-washy multiculturalism. Yes, Britain, like Australia, is a multi-ethnic country, but we need to have less emphasis on diversity and more emphasis on unity. We've got to unite around pride in country and support for Australian and British values. And at the heart of that is respect for democracy, a quest for justice, a desire to do the right thing by everyone, and certainly this idea that we can import hatreds from overseas and live in enclaves as opposed to integrating and assimilating into mainstream society. It's just wrong, and good on Kemi for saying that so strongly.
But perhaps the biggest threat to Kemi Badenoch is someone saying that similar message, even stronger, which is Nigel Farage. Does the Conservative Party here in the UK feel like it's on death's door?
That's certainly not the impression that I get. And I would emphasise that the Conservative Party has been around for 200 years. It's the most successful political party in history. It's been, for most of that time, in government. It's got a lot of muscle memory. There's a lot of inertia in societies like ours, successful societies like ours. Don't write off the Conservatives. The way to succeed in politics is to have a strong, principled and clear position. And on very important topics like the energy insanity, like the border madness, I think that the Tory party under Kemi has now got a strong position. And I would expect to see that position reiterated day in, day out, on the doorsteps of the country, in the social media of the country. That message, the clear message, Britain will get out of the European Convention on Human Rights. Britain will take much more active measures to control its borders at sea and on land. Britain will not put the sugar on the table in terms of giving welfare benefits to people who come here illegally. Britain will get itself out of the net zero straitjacket. It will make use of North Sea oil and gas. It will reindustrialise on the basis of much cheaper energy. I think these are very strong messages that will resonate right across the country.
But again, many of those messages that you've just said are messages that Nigel Farage says day in, day out. Do you have more in common politically with Nigel Farage or Kemi Badenoch?
I know Nigel. I like Nigel. I respect Nigel. But in the end, it's one thing to have a clear message. It's another thing to be a strong and capable party of government. And don't underestimate the muscle memory in this Conservative Party. I mean, the great governments of this country, whether it's the Thatcher government, and look, I know that the former Conservative government here was in many respects a disappointment, but it also had very significant achievements. I mean, Michael Gove's education reforms, Ian Duncan Smith's social services reforms. For much of the time, the economy was in much better shape than it is today. So look, whether we go back to Disraeli, Salisbury, the great governments of the interwar period. I know Churchill led an all-party government, but I mean, Churchill was absolutely the dominant figure in that government. Ask yourself, who are the lions that have given Britain its roar, and they are overwhelmingly Conservatives. If
you were voting in a British election, would your hand and pen hover over the reform box? Would you consider it?
Look, I'm a lifelong Conservative. I want what's best for Britain, and what's best for Britain is a strong and competent Conservative government that knows where it stands and gets on with implementing policy. Now, can I tell you, as a friend of Britain, looking at it from afar, the particular mire that Britain has sunk into, worse than almost any other country that I'm aware of, far too much decision-making has been subcontracted out to unelected and unaccountable bureaucrats. Britain, in some respect, is a quangocracy rather than a democracy. So the next Conservative government has got to immediately repeal the Equalities Act, the Climate Change Act. It's got to get the ECHR out of British law, because at the moment you've got judges making decisions which should be made by the elected and accountable politicians. And this is why people have lost trust in government. This is why people think that whoever you vote for, nothing much changes, because the elected and the accountable politicians are not in charge. They're constantly being overridden by judges and bureaucrats, and this is wrong.
Do you think leaving the ECHR would mean that the UK could suddenly deport all of these people?
Well, the important thing is to stop the peaceful invasion. That's the important thing. Personally, I would probably take a case-by-case attitude to people. If you come illegally, yes, you should be deported, unless you've been here for a long time and you've demonstrated that you are making a useful contribution to society. But I'm not against immigration. Australia is an immigrant society. Immigrants have been very good to Britain as well as Australia. But the immigration has got to be the right people in the right numbers at the right time. And in Britain, as in Australia more recently, legal migration has been out of control. We've got illegal migration under control, unlike Britain, but legal migration in Australia is miles too high. It's not being run by the government. It's effectively being driven by educational institutions that are actually selling migration as opposed to education. It's being driven by employers that would rather import cheap labour than pay people a decent salary and train them up if needs be. So look, there's a lot that needs to be done, but and the next Conservative government has got to take control of all of the arms of government and bend them to its policy rather than simply the status quo administered by unaccountable public servants.
And Nigel Farage has cited you as inspiration for his policies, and he said that he can stop the boats in 2 weeks if he were Prime Minister. Do you think he can stop the boats in 2 weeks?
Well, let me tell you what happened when I became PM. The former Labor government in Australia had lost control of our borders, and it had broken its promises. I mean, Kevin Rudd, when he was opposition leader, had said he would turn boats around. He would essentially keep the Howard government's measures, which had stopped an earlier wave of illegal migration by boat. They'd abandoned all that in office. And in September of 2013, we had 5,000 arrivals by boat. When I came in, we reopened offshore detention. We put back in place temporary protection visas, and we put in place a policy to turn boats around through Operation Sovereign Borders. The most significant change we made was when the people smugglers scuttled their boats, instead of collecting people from the water, taking them to Australia, where basically they got to stay forever, using the court system, etc., we kept them on a mothership, imposed total radio silence so you couldn't engage the human rights lawyers, etc. And then on an appropriate night, we would put them in an unsinkable orange life raft with just enough fuel to get back to Java and say, back you go.
You were able to do that in international waters.
No reason why these people can't be taken into international waters. I mean, the English Channel is narrow between Dover and Calais, but it's wide once you get down towards Normandy. International waters.
So you would suggest that we would escort them down the channel into international waters and then push them back to France?
When they were in British waters, you would take them onto a mothership. I'm just speaking speculatively. You could take them onto a mothership, into international waters, down the channel, and then on a suitable night, they can be back on the shores of France.
But all of this took you some time, about a year. Do you think Nigel Farage could do it in 2 weeks? Did it take you 2 weeks?
I think...
could you do it in 2 weeks?
It took us several months, but it didn't take very long.
So not 2 weeks?
In Britain, I think there would be operations onshore and offshore. Now, honestly, I can't understand why there is not more disruption going on. I mean, these are criminal gangs. This is a migration mafia that is operating in northern France. It's got to be broken. As I said, I think there should be very vigorous disruption operations going on inside France, as well as appropriate operations in the English Channel.
And one of the other things that Nigel Farage suggested is retrospectively revoking indefinite leave to remain. That would impact a lot of Australians and New Zealanders. Do you think Australia should consider reciprocal measures for the 1.1 million Brits
people who have come here perfectly legally, I think, are in a very different position to people who have come illegally. And getting on a small boat, organised by people smugglers, and landing up in Britain, that's just completely unacceptable. And the people who've done it are not genuine asylum seekers. They've travelled through many safe countries before they got to Britain. This whole thing is a racket, basically. So anyone who's come that way has got to expect that they will have no right to remain in Britain. If you've come to Britain perfectly legally and you've been a productive contributor to Britain, working, paying taxes, I think you've got the potential to be a perfectly good Briton.
And on a slightly different note, Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has refused to call China an enemy of the UK. Mm-hmm. Do you think China is an enemy of the UK?
I think communist China is a very, very strong and determined strategic competitor to the West more generally. And look, there is no doubt China is engaged in grey zone warfare against many Western countries, including Australia, including Britain. I mean, all these cyber attacks, for instance, that are quite routine now, they're hostile acts. In Australia's case, for a period, there were $20 billion worth of trade boycotts. We've had incidents in the South China Sea where Chinese military personnel have acted aggressively and dangerously towards Australian ships and planes. Look, you know, I want the best possible relations with China because the last thing we want to do is to see escalation. But I think we have to be very realistic about the challenge that the Beijing regime currently poses. I should then add that none of us should have an argument with the Chinese people. The Chinese people are good people, like people everywhere. There are lots of wonderful people of Chinese heritage in Australia, well, great Australian citizens, but the communist Beijing regime is part of a very serious challenge to the West generally. And as I've often said, because it is a first-rate economy, deeply integrated into the global economy, because we are now seeing an unprecedented military build-up by Beijing. I regret to say that this is a very serious challenge, much more serious, I think, in the long run than the old Soviet Union ever was.
We will do a quick fire round and then hopefully have time for a question or two from the audience. You have just written a book, Tony, a history book on Australia. Kindle or hardcover?
Both.
Both. Audiobook?
Yep.
All three?
Look,
what's your first pick?
I always prefer hardcover myself because I'm a traditionalist conservative.
Nigel Farage or Kemi Badenoch?
Look, I respect Nigel, but it's got to be Kemi.
Kemi Badenoch or Robert Jenrick?
Got to be Kemi.
Winston Churchill or John Howard?
Oh, that's a hard one. They were both the right men for their time and place.
Good answer.
Yeah.
Tim Tams or Penguins?
What are penguins?
Good answer. The US or the UK?
The English-speaking family.
That we have a roving mic somewhere. If we have any questions, over here.
Thank you. Sophie Ing, Politico. The US has launched an inquiry into the AUKUS military pact, which is currently underway. What does the US stand to lose if it leaves the pact? Thanks.
Well, can I say that AUKUS is a very, very significant strategic development. Not just will it give Australia nuclear-powered submarines, and that will be a massive force multiplier for the West, but it also re-engages Britain in what you call the Far East and what we call the Near North. My urgent suggestion to decision makers in Australia and in the United States is, rather than wait until the early 2030s and get free Virginia-class submarines, second-hand Virginia-class submarines off America, when they're having trouble producing enough submarines for their own needs, why don't we in Australia take almost immediately 2 retiring LA-class submarines? And that way, the Americans are under less pressure to give us their Virginias, and we actually get a nuclear-powered submarine immediately. Now, I know they'll say, well, the LA class are 25 years old. Sure. It is always possible to extend the life of these submarines. If we were in a situation of imminent hostilities, they wouldn't be retiring them anyway. So let's not retire them. Let's hand them to the Royal Australian Navy. And so we will have a nuclear-powered submarine, a highly capable nuclear-powered submarine under the Australian White Ensign now.
One more question. Anyone has anything? Stick your hands up. Speak now. Oh, we've got one over here.
Hi, yeah, Andrew McDonald, also from Politico. You worked with Boris Johnson when he was in office. I just wonder, are the Conservatives missing a character like that now? Are you on the Bring Back Boris train?
Look, I thought Boris was by far the biggest personality in British politics. I read Boris's wonderful book about Churchill. It may not be great history, but by God, it was a great read. And I thought to myself that in writing that book, Boris was thinking himself into the shoes of Britain's most legendary Prime Minister. And I thought Boris was going to be absolutely wonderful. Now, there were, Boris's lasting historic achievement was more or less getting Brexit done. So good on him, congratulations. You will be an important figure of history for that. Unfortunately, for all sorts of reasons, the Johnson government was a disappointment in the end. I guess the last Conservative government in the end ebbed out of office, I think at the moment, what's important for everyone who wants Britain to succeed and wants Conservatives to succeed, get behind Kemi Badenoch. I think her recent speeches have been outstanding. I think that she's incredibly well placed to argue for the right policies on immigration and national unity. I think she's now got a good way forward against the looming energy catastrophe. So Kemi's my girl.
Tony Abbott, thank you very much. Next up here at the Politico Pub will be Sam and Anne at 4 p.m. on the road ahead for the Conservative Party. But in the meantime, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the drink.